The salt-laden winds of Port Blackwell carried whispers that cut deeper than any blade. They called her the crone's daughter, though Eleanor Thorne was barely 20. Her face, marked with a web of scars from childhood fever, made her an outcast in a world where a woman's beauty determined her fate. When her father, deep in gambling debts, traded her to Captain James Blackwood, the most feared pirate on the Spanish Main, for a single barrel of Jamaican rum, the town erupted in cruel laughter. They said the devil's captain had been swindled, but as Eleanor stood trembling on the weathered dock, Captain Blackwood's storm-grey eyes held something unexpected, not disgust, but recognition. Eleanor Thorne's days in Port Blackwell followed a rhythm as predictable as the tides. She rose before dawn, when the fishermen's wives were still dreaming, and the street dogs hadn't yet begun their morning hunt for scraps. These quiet hours were hers alone, a brief respite from the stares and whispers that accompanied her daylight movement. Her small wooden apothecary box, her mother's final gift, sat on the rickety table beside her pallet. Inside, neatly arranged dried herbs, roots and powders, told stories of healing and care that her fingers remembered even as her mother's face grew dim in memory. Rosemary for headaches, comfrey for broken bones, chamomile for sleeplessness. Knowledge passed from mother to daughter across generations, now confined to secret practice in pre-dawn darkness. Eleanor, her father's voice, rough with last night's rum, broke through her concentration as she ground willow bark for Mrs. Peterson's rheumatism. "Where's my breakfast, girl?" Thomas Thorne had once been the most respected shipwright in Port Blackwell. Now he was its most indebted drunk, his skilled hands too unsteady to craft the fine vessels that had once been his pride. After her mother's death and Eleanor's illness left her scarred, something had broken in him too. A different kind of scarring, visible only in the perpetual disappointment clouding his eyes when he looked at his daughter. "Coming, father," she called, quickly wrapping the willow bark powder and tucking her apothecary box beneath loose floorboards. The town physician had warned her once about women playing at medicine. Since then, she'd learned discretion. She served her father hard bread and salted fish, standing silently as he ate. The small cottage that had once housed a family of 3 now seemed to shrink around them both, weighted with unspoken regrets. "The Blackwood ship was spotted yesterday," Thomas said between mouthfuls. "Should make port by midday." Eleanor's stomach tightened. Captain Blackwood's quarterly visits to Port Blackwell always meant trouble, debts collected, men pressed into service, tavern brawls that left blood on the cobblestone. His fearsome reputation reached far beyond the boundaries of their modest port town. "I'll stay home today then," she murmured. Thomas laughed, a harsh sound devoid of humor. "No, you'll go to market, same as always. We need salt and flour, and Widow Jenkins wants that cough remedy." "But father, no daughter of mine hides from some jumped-up pirate," he snapped, though they both knew the lie in his words. He'd hidden from worse, and often. "Besides, that face of yours keeps even the rowdiest sailors at bay." The casual cruelty no longer stung as it once had. Eleanor simply nodded, donned her worn cloak, and stepped into the awakening town. Market day in Port Blackwell transformed the harbour square into a riot of colour and noise. Eleanor kept her hood drawn, moving efficiently between stalls, exchanging small packets of medicine for the necessities they couldn't produce themselves. Most transactions were conducted with minimal words, her presence tolerated only for her healing skills. "If it isn't the crone's daughter," came a silky voice as Eleanor examined a basket of dried beans. Marianne Porter, the tavern owner's daughter and possessor of the town's most envied complexion, stood with 2 companions. "Shopping for beauty potions? I fear even your witchcraft has its limits." Eleanor gripped her market basket tighter. "Good morning, Marianne. They say Blackwood's ship carries a cargo of Spanish silks this time," Marianne continued, fingering her own fine dress. "Father says the captain always pays in gold for our best rum. It's a shame your face would curdle it before it touched his lips." The other girls tittered. Eleanor stepped around them, her silence her only defense. My mother says your mother was just as strange, Marianne called after her. Always mixing her potions and speaking of foreign places. Perhaps that's why she died so young, meddling with what she shouldn't. Eleanor halted, rare anger flaring. Her mother had been beautiful, educated, kind, everything Port Blackwell couldn't understand or accept. She had died trying to save Eleanor from the fever that scarred her, using her last strength to cool her daughter's burning skin instead of tending to her own illness. Before Eleanor could form a response, the harbor bell began to toll. Conversations halted as all eyes turned seaward, where a black-sailed ship rounded the headland. The Black Pearl had arrived, Port Blackwell, transformed with the arrival of the Black Pearl. Fishermen abandoned their nets, merchants hastily closed shops, and mothers called children indoors. The feared vessel cut through the water with predatory grace, its black sails catching the midday sun like ravens' wings. Eleanor watched from the shadow of a chandler's shop as the magnificent ship docked. Unlike the weathered fishing boats or occasional merchant vessels that frequented their harbor, the Black Pearl emanated power. 3 masts reached skyward, 16 cannons lined each side, and intricate carvings adorned its bow. A woman with flowing hair, her arms outstretched as if embracing the sea itself. That figurehead's carved from a single piece of mahogany, a gruff voice beside her observed. Old Samuel the harbormaster leaned on his walking stick. Blackwood commissioned it in Tortuga 5 years back. Paid the carver's weight in silver, they say. You've met him, haven't you? Eleanor asked quietly. Captain Blackwood. Samuel's weathered face creased. 3 times now, not a man you forget. Is he truly as ruthless as they say? Worse, girl, those stories about him sinking the governor's fleet at Charleston. They leave out how he let the officers drown while saving the common sailors, or how he once hanged a man from his own yardarm for striking a serving girl. Samuel spat. Selective mercy makes him more terrifying than simple cruelty. You never know which side of him you'll get. The gangplank lowered with a heavy thud. First came 2 sailors with pistols tucked into bright sashes. Then a tall figure emerged, standing motionless at the ship's edge, surveying the port as a king might assess his domain. Captain James Blackwood did not match the monster of Eleanor's imagination. No hook hand or peg leg, no patch covering a missing eye. Instead, she saw a man perhaps 15 years her senior, broad-shouldered in a midnight blue coat with silver buttons catching the sunlight. His dark hair was tied back with a simple leather cord, revealing a face that might have been handsome if not for the hardness around his mouth and the calculating coldness in his gaze. The devil dresses well, Samuel muttered. Eleanor couldn't look away as Blackwood descended to the dock, his movements fluid despite the sword at his hip and pistols at his belt. 2 more men followed, one enormous with arms like tree trunks, the other thin and sharp-featured, with a ledger clutched to his chest. That's First Mate Harrison, Samuel indicated the giant, and the weasel is Quartermaster Phillips. Between them they've likely killed more men than fever has in these parts. Port Blackwell's officials emerged to greet the pirate captain, not with the deference due to legitimate traders, but with the cautious respect afforded to dangerous predators. The harbor master, customs officer, and even the magistrate himself approached with forced smiles. Captain Blackwood, the magistrate called with false cheer. Port Blackwell welcomes you. Does it? Blackwood's voice carried across the dock, deeper than Eleanor expected, cultured despite its edge. Your welcome seems rather reluctant, Magistrate Wilson. Nonsense, the magistrate blustered. We merely wish to ensure proper protocols. Your protocols bore me, Blackwood interrupted. My men require refreshment and entertainment. My ship needs supplies. I require a meeting with my debtors. His gaze swept the gathering crowd, causing people to flinch away. I understand Thomas Thorne still resides here. Eleanor's heart stuttered. Her father's gambling debts had grown worse over winter, but she hadn't realized they extended to Blackwood himself. Thorne, the magistrate's relief at shifting attention was palpable. Yes, though I wouldn't count on collecting. The man's nothing but a drunkard now. Blackwood's expression didn't change. Nevertheless, the crowd parted as he strode into town, his officers flanking him. The rest of the crew, a motley collection of hardened men from what seemed every corner of the world, followed in disciplined formation. Their weathered faces and armed presence sent the clear message: the Black Pearl might be docked, but its dangerous nature remained. "You'd best warn your father," Samuel whispered to Eleanor. "When Blackwood collects debts, he takes payment one way or another." Eleanor clutched her market basket tighter and hurried homeward. She found her father already halfway through a bottle, his hands shaking as he poured another measure. "You've heard then?" she asked from the doorway. Thomas Thorne looked up, his eyes bloodshot and fearful. He wasn't supposed to return until next month. "How much do you owe him?" Her father's laugh held no humor. "More than we have. More than we'll ever have." "Then what will you do?" Thomas took another long swallow before answering, not meeting her eyes. "I'm still considering my options." Something in his tone made Eleanor's skin crawl. She had the sudden, terrible feeling that she might be among those options. Eleanor couldn't sleep. Through the thin wall separating their rooms, she heard her father pacing, muttering, occasionally taking swigs from his bottle. Twice the front door opened and closed as visitors arrived, men speaking in hushed, urgent tones about Blackwood and payment due. Dawn found her exhausted but alert, grinding herbs with mechanical precision as her father finally succumbed to drunken sleep. The pending confrontation with Blackwood hung over the cottage like a storm cloud. A heavy knock rattled their door shortly before noon. Eleanor froze, pestle in hand, as her father lurched awake with a startled oath. The knock came again, more insistent. "Coming," Thomas called, fumbling for his shirt. "Eleanor, make yourself scarce." Instead, she straightened her simple dress and stood beside the hearth as her father opened the door. Sunlight framed the imposing silhouette of Captain Blackwood, flanked by his thin quartermaster, who clutched a familiar ledger. "Thorne." Blackwood's voice filled their small home. His gaze briefly touched Eleanor before returning to her father. "You've been avoiding my men." Thomas attempted a weak smile. "Captain, an honor to welcome you to my humble spare me." Blackwood stepped inside uninvited, ducking slightly beneath the low doorframe. Up close he seemed even larger, his presence consuming the available space. "Phillips, remind Mr. Thorne of his outstanding obligations." The quartermaster cleared his throat. "Thomas Thorne, 3 loans totaling £78 sterling, with interest accrued at £2 monthly since February last, bringing the current sum to—" He paused for dramatic effect. £104, 6 shillings. The color drained from Thomas's face. "Captain, surely there's some arrangement." "We had an arrangement," Blackwood interrupted. 3, in fact. All broken. His eyes surveyed the modest cottage. "I see nothing here worth a fraction of your dent." Eleanor watched her father shrink before this man, his shoulders hunching, eyes darting like a cornered animal's. She'd seen this desperation before. It always preceded his worst decisions. "Perhaps," Thomas began, voice quavering, "we might discuss an alternative payment." Blackwood's eyebrow rose slightly. "I'm listening." Thomas gestured toward Eleanor with a jerky motion. "My daughter." The word hung in the air like a physical thing. Eleanor felt her breath catch, though the suggestion wasn't entirely unexpected. In their world, women were occasionally traded to settle debts, as servants, as wives, as less than either. "Father," she whispered, but he wouldn't meet her eyes. Blackwood turned to fully face Eleanor for the first time. His gaze wasn't lecherous as she'd feared, but coolly appraising, like a man evaluating horseflesh or cargo. "Your daughter," he repeated flatly. Thomas nodded eagerly. "She's of marriageable age, keeps a decent house, knows herbs and medicines worth something to a ship's captain, I'd wager." Eleanor's face burned with humiliation. She was being bartered like a sack of flour, her own father highlighting her useful qualities while carefully omitting mention of her scarred appearance. The quartermaster snickered. "Captain, you can't seriously." Blackwood silenced him with a gesture. "And what would you consider fair value for your daughter, Thorn?" Her father licked his lips. "The full debt, of course." "Of course." Blackwood's tone was unreadable. "And if I find your offering inadequate?" "She works hard," Thomas said quickly. "Doesn't complain. Ask anyone in town." "A barrel." Blackwood interrupted. "Pardon?" "1 barrel of Jamaican rum. That's my offer for the girl." The quartermaster's jaw dropped. "Captain." "Silence, Phillips." Blackwood never took his eyes from Thomas. "1 barrel against your debt. The rest you'll still owe me with interest." Eleanor couldn't believe what she was hearing. Not only was she being traded away, but for a pittance, a single barrel of spirits, less than a good hunting dog might fetch. Her father hesitated only briefly before nodding. "Done." "Father, please." Eleanor finally found her voice. "Don't do this." Thomas wouldn't look at her. "It's done, girl. Pack your things. What few you have." Blackwood watched their exchange, impassively. "My men will deliver the barrel this afternoon. Have her ready at the main dock by 4 bells. He turned to leave, then paused. "Oh, and Thorn, if you attempt to flee port before our next visit, I'll find you." The outcome would be unpleasant. After they departed, Eleanor stood motionless, the reality of what had just transpired washing over her in waves. Her father immediately reached for his bottle. "You've sold me," she said flatly. "For rum." "I've secured you a position," he corrected, drinking deeply. "Better than you'd find in this town with that face." Eleanor turned away, unable to bear the sight of him. She had 3 hours to pack her meager possessions and say goodbye to the only home she'd ever known, a home that had just traded her away like unwanted furniture. The dockside gathering to witness Eleanor's departure was larger than her father's funeral would likely be. Townspeople lined the weathered planks, some openly jeering, others watching with the detached interest of spectators at a hanging. Marianne Porter stood front and center, her perfect lips curved in triumph. Eleanor clutched her small wooden chest, containing everything she'd been permitted to bring: 2 dresses, her mother's shawl, a crude wooden comb, and hidden beneath a false bottom, her precious apothecary box. The afternoon sun beat down mercilessly, highlighting every scar on her exposed face and neck. "The ugliest bride in Port Blackwell," someone called out. Laughter rippled through the crowd. "Poor Captain got swindled worse than Thorn." Another voice added. Her father stood several paces away, already halfway through the rum barrel that had been her price. He hadn't offered a goodbye, merely a grunt, as she'd left their cottage for the last time. A tall figure emerged from the crowd. Blackwood, resplendent in his captain's coat. The mockery died instantly, replaced by wary silence. Without acknowledgement of the spectators, he approached Eleanor and extended his hand. "Miss Thorn," he said, his voice betraying nothing of his thoughts. Eleanor stared at his offered hand, then at his face. What she saw there wasn't kindness exactly, but neither was it the lascivious anticipation she'd feared. Something more complex lurked in those storm-gray eyes. She placed her hand in his, surprised by its warmth. Captuba. They walked the length of the dock, her small chest tucked beneath her other arm. Behind them whispers resumed, but Eleanor kept her gaze fixed on the magnificent ship ahead. Whatever fate awaited her there, it couldn't be worse than the life she was leaving behind. The first mate, Harrison, she recalled, waited at the gangplank. His massive frame blocked the sun as he looked her over with undisguised skepticism. "This is what you traded good rum for, Captain?" he asked, not bothering to lower his voice. "Mind your tone, Miss Harrison," Blackwood replied mildly. "Miss Thorn is now under my protection." Protection. The word echoed strangely in Eleanor's mind as she followed Blackwood up the gangplank and onto the deck of the Black Pearl. She'd expected many things, servitude, worse, but protection hadn't been among them. The ship buzzed with activity as sailors prepared to depart with the evening tide. Some paused to stare at the captain's newest acquisition, but quick glances from Blackwood sent them scurrying back to their tasks. Quarters first, he decided, leading her toward the stern. Then introduction. Eleanor had imagined she'd be relegated to some dark corner of the hold or forced to share space with the crew. Instead, Blackwood opened the door to a small but private cabin adjacent to his own. A narrow bed with clean linens occupied one wall. A small table with a washing basin stood beneath a porthole that admitted both light and fresh air. A trunk for storage completed the modest mortises. "These were my first quarters as a young officer," he explained, watching her stunned expression. "They've served as our ship's surgeon's cabin since, but we've been without one this past year." Eleanor placed her chest on the trunk, unable to reconcile this unexpected courtesy with the fearsome reputation of the Devil's captain. "I don't understand," she said finally. "What don't you understand, Miss Thorne? Any of this? Why you would trade rum for me? Why you would give me private quarters? What you expect in return?" Blackwood leaned against the doorframe, regarding her thoughtfully. "The rum was of no consequence. As for quarters, I'm not in the habit of treating people like cargo, regardless of how they came into my service." "And what is my service to be?" Eleanor asked, the question that had plagued her since the bargain was struck. "That depends on your skills. Your father mentioned knowledge of herbs and medicine." Eleanor nodded cautiously. "My mother taught me. I've treated townspeople for years, though in secret. The town physician doesn't approve of women healers. The town physician is an idiot," Blackwood stated flatly. "We lost our surgeon to fever 6 months ago. Since then, injuries and illnesses have taken a greater toll on my crew than Spanish cannons ever did." Understanding dawned. "You need a healer. I need someone with knowledge and steady hands. The rest can be taught." He straightened. "Get settled. The bus'un will fetch you for the evening meal. We sail with the tide." He turned to leave, then paused. "One thing more, Miss Thorne. Whatever you may have heard about me, know this. On my ship you'll be judged by your actions, not your appearance. That courtesy extends from captain to cabin boy." With that he was gone, leaving Eleanor alone in a space that, small as it was, offered more dignity than she'd known in years. She unpacked her meager belongings, fingers lingering on her mother's apothecary box. For the first time since the bargain, a tentative hope flickered within her, not happiness, not yet, but possibility. Eleanor woke to the gentle rocking of the Black Pearl and the unfamiliar sounds of a ship at sea. For a moment, disorientation gripped her, the ceiling too low, the air too salty, the light filtering through a round porthole rather than her cottage's square window. Then memory returned in a rush. Her father's bargain, the jeering crowd, Captain Blackwood's unexpected courtesy. She'd slept better than anticipated. The narrow bunk proved surprisingly comfortable after years on her straw pallet, and the clean linens carried a faint scent of lavender that reminded her of her mother's garden. A knock at the door interrupted her thoughts. "Miss, Captain says you're to come up when you're ready. Sent these for you." A young boy, perhaps 12, stood outside with a bundle. His eyes widened at her scarred face, but, to his credit, he maintained his composure. "I'm Pip, ship's boy. Cook's apprentice too, when Cook's not throwing things at me." Eleanor accepted the bundle, a sturdy pair of leather boots, practical and well-made. "Thank you, Pip. You really a witch, miss," he blurted, then immediately looked horrified at his own boldness. "No," she replied gently, "just someone who knows about plants and healing." He sounded disappointed. Only some of the men were saying. He stopped himself. "Never mind. Galley's serving breakfast another hour. Ladder to the main deck is at the end of the passage." The boots fit well enough, Eleanor discovered as she made her way topside. The morning air carried a brisk chill, but the rising sun promised warmth to come. She emerged onto a deck, bustling with activity, men calling to one another as they went about their duties. For a moment, she stood forgotten, taking in the vastness of the ocean surrounding them. Port Blackwell had vanished completely. No land visible in any direction, just endless blue stretching to meet the sky at the horizon. A sense of vertigo gripped her, followed by something unexpected, exhilaration. First time at sea. Captain Blackwood stood at the quarterdeck railing, a brass spyglass in his hand. Without waiting for her answer, he descended to the main deck and extended the instrument. "Look through this," he instructed. "It makes distant things appear close." The spyglass was heavier than it appeared, warm from his hand. Eleanor raised it to her eye as he demonstrated, gasping as the horizon leaped forward. She adjusted her aim upward to where seabirds wheeled against the clouds, their distant specks suddenly transformed into detailed creatures with individual feathers and watchful eyes. "It's remarkable," she breathed. "A Dutch invention," Blackwood said. "Revolutionized navigation and warfare alike. Much of our world is shaped by such tools. Things that change how we see, how far we can reach." He took back the spyglass, collapsing it with practiced movements. "Your quarters are satisfactory." "Yes, Captain. Thank you." "Good. Mr. Phillips will show you our medical supplies after breakfast. I expect you'll find them inadequate." "I brought some of my own," Eleanor offered. "Herbs, tinctures." Blackwood nodded. "Make a list of what else you require. We'll restock in Havana." The easy assumption that she would remain aboard long enough to see Havana surprised her. "Captain, may I ask a question?" "You may. How long do you intend to keep me in your service?" His expression revealed nothing. "Is a specific term important to you?" Eleanor considered what awaited her back in Port Blackwell. Mockery, poverty, her father's resentment. "No," she admitted. "I merely wish to understand my situation." "Your situation, Miss Thorne, is that you are now ship's surgeon aboard the Black Pearl. You will be compensated accordingly, with a share of our profits. Your contract, should you choose to formalize one, would be with me, not your father." He paused. "In short, you are no longer property to be traded for rum or any other commodity." Before she could respond, a shout came from above. "Sail ho! Merchant vessel northwest quadrant." The atmosphere on deck transformed instantly. Men straightened, hands moved to weapons, voices lowered to urgent murmurs. Blackwood extended the spyglass again, this time focusing on the distant horizon. "Spanish galleon," he announced, riding low in the water. Well armed but sluggish, he glanced at Eleanor. "You're about to witness how we earn our reputation, Miss Thorne." "You're attacking that ship?" she asked, her voice barely audible. "I'd prefer to think of it as an aggressive negotiation." He turned to his first mate. "Mr. Harrison, battle stations. Run out the guns, but keep gun ports closed. I want them to see our black sails before they see our teeth." As the crew leapt to action around her, Eleanor gripped the railing, suddenly aware of the vast difference between hearing stories of the Devil's captain and witnessing his work firsthand. Blackwood noticed her distress. "You needn't watch, Miss Thorne. Return to your cabin if you prefer." Something in his tone, not mocking but challenging, straightened her spine. "My role is to tend the wounded, is it not? I should remain accessible." A smile ghosted across his face, the first she'd seen. "As you wish, but stay clear of the quarterdeck until you're called." "And Miss Thorne?" "Yes, Captain. Welcome to your new horizon." The aggressive negotiation had gone remarkably well for the Black Pearl. The Spanish galleon, recognizing the infamous black sails, had surrendered after a brief show of resistance, just long enough for honor to be satisfied, not long enough for significant bloodshed. Only 3 of Blackwood's men sustained injuries: a musket ball graze, a splinter wound, and a broken arm from a deckhand's fall. Eleanor's small surgery quickly proved its worth. She'd transformed her cabin into a treatment area, with clean linens, boiled water, and her precious herb pouch laid out methodically on the table beside her instruments. "Hold still," she instructed Garrick, the sailor with the musket wound. His weathered face contorted as she cleaned the angry furrow along his bicep. Bloody hell, woman, he growled. You've a rougher touch than my first wife, and she once tried to gut me with a fish knife. Perhaps she had her reasons, Eleanor replied mildly, reaching for her herb pouch. From it she extracted dried yarrow and crushed it between her fingers. This will help stop the bleeding and prevent putrefaction. Garrick eyed the herbs suspiciously. Don't need no witch's brew. Just wrap it tight and give me a tot of rum. You'll get both, she promised, but this goes on first unless you prefer to lose the arm by week's end. A shadow darkened the doorway. Captain Blackwood stood watching, his expression unreadable. Listen to her, Garrick, he commanded. Miss Thorne knows her business better than you know yours. The sailor subsided immediately. Aye, Captain. Eleanor worked efficiently, applying the yarrow poultice, then binding the wound with clean linen. Change this dressing tomorrow. Return if you see red streaks or feel unusual heat. As Garrick left, muttering thanks, Blackwood entered the small cabin. Your next patient has a compound fracture. Davis fell from the rigging. Can you set a bone? I've done it before, she answered, wiping her hands on a cloth. I'll need help holding him steady. You'll have it. 2 hours later, with all 3 men treated and resting, Eleanor finally emerged on deck. The sun hung low on the horizon, painting the sea in shades of molten gold. The captured galleon sailed alongside them, now under the command of Blackwood's quartermaster and a skeleton crew. Eleanor found a quiet spot near the bow, away from the main activity. Her hands, steady throughout the treatments, now trembled slightly from fatigue and delayed reaction. She'd never worked on injuries inflicted by deliberate violence before, only accidents and illness. Miss Thorne, she turned to find Blackwood approaching, carrying 2 pewter cups. He offered one to her. It's not rum, he assured her, as she hesitated. Just wine, watered for the evening watch. She accepted the cup, sipping cautiously. The wine was better than any she'd tasted in Port Blackwell. Your men will recover, she told him, though Davis should remain abed for at least a fortnight to allow proper healing. So Mr. Harrison informed me. Blackwood leaned against the railing. The crew is impressed. Our last surgeon was competent, but heavy-handed. You have a gentler approach. Pain serves no purpose in healing, Eleanor said. My mother taught me that. She believed suffering should be eased whenever possible. A compassionate philosophy. She was a compassionate woman. Eleanor hesitated, then added, unlike many in Port Blackwell, she never judged people by appearances. Blackwood's gaze flickered briefly to her scarred face, then back to the horizon. A rare quality. Yes. They stood in companionable silence as the sun continued its descent. Finally, Blackwood spoke again. The Spanish captain had a small library aboard his ship. Among the volumes was a treatise on herbal medicine by a physician in Madrid. I thought it might interest you. He produced a leather-bound book from his coat. It's in Spanish, but there are illustrations. Eleanor accepted the book with care, running her fingers over the tooled leather cover. You read Spanish, Captain? Among other languages, a necessity in my line of work. Thank you, she said, genuinely touched by the thoughtful gesture. I'll study the illustrations carefully. See that you do. I expect my ship's surgeon to expand her knowledge at every opportunity. The pride that rose in her chest at his words was unexpected. She'd gone from being property to be traded to someone with a title, a role, expectations to fulfill. Captain, called the helmsman. Winds shifting. Orders? Maintain course, Blackwood replied. We'll make Havana by midday tomorrow. He turned back to Eleanor. Rest, Miss Thorne. You've earned it. As he walked away, Eleanor remained at the railing, watching the last sliver of sun disappear beneath the waves. Her herb pouch, worn at her belt like a badge of office, caught the fading light. It contained knowledge passed from mother to daughter, secrets of healing that had once required hiding, but were now openly valued. For the first time since childhood, Eleanor felt something like belonging, not acceptance exactly, That might be too much to hope for. But purpose, usefulness, the beginnings of respect. It was, she reflected, far more than she'd ever expected from being sold for a barrel of rum. Havana had been a revelation with its Spanish architecture and bustling markets, but Port Royal nearly overwhelmed Eleanor's senses. The infamous pirate haven sprawled across the southeastern tip of Jamaica, a chaotic maze of taverns, warehouses, brothels, and merchants' shops. Ships from every nation crowded the harbor, their crews mingling in a babel of languages and competing interests held in check only by the unspoken code of this lawless sanctuary. "Stay close," Blackwood instructed as they disembarked. Port Royal devours the unwary. Eleanor needed no encouragement. The raucous crowds pressing around them made Port Blackwell's market day seem genteel by comparison. Sailors, merchants, prostitutes, pickpockets, all jostled along the waterfront in a riot of color and noise. "Are we not going ashore, Captain?" she asked, confused when he steered her, not toward the main thoroughfare, but to a smaller dock adjacent to the Black Pearl's berth. "Not you," he said. "Not yet. Port Royal is no place for a woman alone, especially one unaccustomed to its particular dangers. I'm to remain prisoner aboard, then?" She couldn't keep the disappointment from her voice. Blackwood's expression softened slightly. "Not prisoner, protected. I have business that can't wait, settling accounts, arranging cargo. Harrison will accompany me. Phillips will remain aboard with a skeleton crew. You'll be safe here." Fear clutched at Eleanor, not of remaining aboard, but of being left behind entirely. What if Blackwood decided she wasn't worth the trouble? What if he simply never returned? She would be stranded, a woman alone in a pirate port, with nothing but the clothes on her back. "When will you return?" she asked, struggling to keep her voice steady. "By nightfall." He studied her face. "You think I mean to abandon you here?" It wasn't a question. Eleanor flushed, embarrassed by her transparency. The thought occurred, she admitted. Blackwood reached into his pocket and pressed something into her palm. A silver coin, heavy and gleaming in the tropical sunlight. "A portion of your share from the Spanish galleon," he explained. "The rest awaits in my cabin, once our accountings are complete. I don't abandon those in my service, Miss Thorne, especially those who have proven their value." The coin felt warm against her skin, the first money she had ever earned that was truly her own. Not her father's charity, not payment for secret remedies delivered under cover of darkness, but rightful compensation for her skills. "Thank you, Captain," she said softly. He nodded. "I'll send Pip with anything you require." And Eleanor. He rarely used her given name. The sound of it in his deep voice sent an unexpected shiver through her. "Stay out of sight of passing ships. Port Royal harbors those who might recognize you from Port Blackwell, and I'd prefer your presence aboard remain discreet for now." With that cryptic warning he departed with Harrison, leaving Eleanor to wonder what possible interest anyone might have in a scarred healer from a forgotten port town. The day passed slowly. Eleanor inventoried their medical supplies, studied her Spanish herbal book, and treated a sailor's festering splinter. By late afternoon, restlessness drove her to the quarterdeck for fresh air, careful to remain in the shadow of the mainmast as Blackwood had advised. From this vantage, she observed the parade of humanity along the docks, merchants in fine coats, sailors with sunburned faces, women in dresses both proper and scandalously revealing. A group of naval officers passed, their uniforms marking them as British. Eleanor instinctively shrank back, though she couldn't have said why. "They're looking for him, you know." She startled at the voice behind her. Quartermaster Phillips stood there, his thin face inscrutable. "For the captain," he clarified. "The Royal Navy has a standing bounty on James Blackwood, £500, dead or alive." Eleanor's heart quickened. "Why tell me this?" Phillips shrugged. "Just making conversation. Must be boring for you stuck aboard while the rest of us come and go." His eyes, calculating and cold, assessed her scarred features, though perhaps staying hidden is preferable. "In your case." The deliberate cruelty was familiar. She'd faced worse in Port Blackwell, but it stung nonetheless. "If you've work to attend to, Miss Phillips, don't let me detain you," she said coolly. His thin lips twisted in what might have been a smile. "The captain's taken quite an interest in you. Can't imagine why, but a word of caution. His interest rarely stays fixed for long. When he tires of his new toy, I'll be happy to help you find alternative arrangements in Port Royal. A woman with medical knowledge could earn her keep, even with your disadvantages." The threat beneath his offer was unmistakable. Eleanor straightened her spine. "I believe I'll manage, Miss Phillips, but I appreciate your concern." He opened his mouth to respond when a shout from the dock interrupted them. "Ship ahoy, Captain returning." Eleanor moved to the railing, relief flooding through her at the sight of Blackwood's tall figure approaching. As if sensing her gaze, he looked up, his expression darkening when he saw Phillips standing close behind her. That night, after they'd set sail again, Eleanor lay awake in her narrow bunk, the silver coin clutched in her palm like a talisman. Port Royal had shown her both the promise and peril of her new life. The freedom of earned silver, the danger of men like Phillips, and the strange, unsettling protection of Captain James Blackwood, the Devil's captain, who had £500 on his head, but had paid her fairly for her work. 2 weeks at sea had transformed Eleanor. Her hands, once soft from herb grinding and poultice making, now bore calluses from helping with ship's tasks. Her skin had darkened under the Caribbean sun, and she moved with the rolling gait of a sailor, anticipating the ship's movements beneath her feet. The crew had gradually accepted her presence, especially after she'd successfully treated Davis's broken arm, cured the cook's persistent cough, and created a salve that healed rope burns overnight. Even Harrison, initially skeptical, now tipped his hat when they passed on deck. Only Phillips maintained his distance, watching her with calculating eyes that made her skin crawl. "You've been avoiding me," Blackwood observed one evening as she joined him on the quarterdeck. The sun hung low on the horizon, painting the sky in spectacular shades of orange and pink. "Not you specifically, Captain," Eleanor replied, gripping the railing. "Just keeping busy. Too busy for our evening discussions. I've missed your insights on Madrid's approach to medicinal herbs." She smiled despite herself. Their conversations about the Spanish medical text had become a quiet ritual, a peaceful interlude between the day's demands and night's rest. "Forgive me, I've been distracted." By Phillips. At her startled look, Blackwood's expression hardened. "I see how he watches you. Has he said something inappropriate?" "Nothing worth repeating," she deflected. "Captain, may I ask where we're bound? We've been sailing southeast for days." He allowed the subject change. "A small atoll, uninhabited except when we visit. We need to careen the ship, clean her hull, check for damage. It's a secluded spot, safe from prying eyes." "Naval eyes, you mean?" Blackwood studied her face. Phillips mentioned the bounty. "He did. Are you concerned about sailing with a wanted man?" Eleanor considered this. "I'm more curious about why you're wanted. £500 seems excessive for ordinary piracy." "Ordinary piracy," Blackwood repeated, with a wry smile. "There's nothing ordinary about how I conduct my affairs, Miss Thorne." He reached inside his coat and withdrew a leather-bound book. "Not the Spanish herbal, but something smaller, older. Perhaps this will satisfy some of your curiosity." She accepted the logbook carefully. Its cover was weathered, the pages inside filled with precise handwriting, coordinates, dates, cargo manifests, personal observations. "This is yours, my first command," he confirmed. "Read it at your leisure. It may help you understand certain matters." The book felt heavy with significance. "Thank you for trusting me with this." "Trust must start somewhere." He paused. "Eleanor, about Phillips, Captain." "Sail on the horizon." The lookout's cry cut through their conversation. Blackwood immediately pulled out his spyglass, focusing on the distant ship. His expression revealed nothing, but Eleanor sensed his tension. "Colors," he called up to the lookout. "None visible, Captain. Bearing, northwest by north, sir, on intercept course. Prepare to come about, Blackwood ordered. All hands to stations. As the crew scrambled to their positions, Eleanor clutched the logbook to her chest. Is it the Navy? Unlikely. They fly their colors proudly, even in pursuit. His eyes narrowed. More likely privateers or rivals. Either way, we'll outrun them. The Pearl is the fastest ship in these waters. Eleanor started toward her cabin, but Blackwood caught her arm. Wait, there's something I need to show you. He led her quickly to his quarters, a space she'd never entered before. Unlike her small cabin, his was spacious, with windows spanning the stern, flooding the room with golden light. A large desk dominated the space, covered with maps, navigational instruments and ledgers. Blackwood moved to a cabinet, unlocked it with a key from his pocket, and extracted a rolled parchment. If anything happens to me, you'll need this. Nothing will happen to you, she protested. Nevertheless, he unrolled the document on his desk. This is a letter of marque, issued by the Dutch government. It grants me legal authority to seize Spanish vessels as a privateer in service to Holland. Eleanor stared at the official-looking document with its elaborate seal. You're not truly a pirate, in British and Spanish eyes. Certain, to the Dutch, I'm a naval auxiliary. His smile held no warmth. Perspective is everything in our world, Eleanor. Remember that. The ship lurched as it changed course, sending her stumbling against him. His hands steadied her, strong and sure against her shoulders. For a moment they stood too close, his storm-grey eyes searching hers. The logbook will explain more, he said quietly. My family's shipping company in Bristol. The British admiral who seized our vessels on false charges of smuggling. My father's imprisonment and death. My unconventional quest for justice. Understanding dawned. You're targeting ships owned by this admiral. Among others, he released her and resealed the document. The Navy doesn't pursue me for common piracy, but for humiliating one of their own. Admiral Winthrop has made my capture his personal mission. The pieces aligned in Eleanor's mind. Blackwood's educated speech, his knowledge of languages and navigation, his code of conduct. Not a common pirate born to lawlessness, but a gentleman driven to it by injustice. Why tell me this? Because you deserve to know whom you serve. He closed the cabinet and locked it. And because I'm tired of being alone with my history. The simple admission, so human from a man shrouded in fearsome reputation, touched something deep within her. Before she could respond, Harrison's voice bellowed from the deck. Captain, they're gaining. Blackwood's expression shifted instantly back to the commanding presence his crew knew. Return to your cabin, Eleanor. Secure anything loose. This may be a rough night. As she hurried out, clutching his logbook against her chest, Eleanor realized he had called her by her given name throughout their conversation. Somehow, amid revelations of naval pursuits and private vendettas, that small intimacy seemed the most significant revelation of all. The pursuing vessel proved faster than anticipated. By nightfall, its silhouette had grown from a distant smudge to a clear threat, its course unwavering despite the Black Pearl's evasive maneuvers. British frigate Harrison confirmed grimly after studying it through the spyglass. 32 guns flying naval pennants now. Blackwood's expression remained impassive, but Eleanor, watching from the shadows of the mainmast, saw the tension in his shoulders. Admiral Winthrop? Can't confirm, Captain, but she's moving like she means business. A flash of light from the frigate's bow preceded the distant boom of cannon fire. Seconds later, a splash erupted in the water, some 100 yards astern, a ranging shot. They're measuring distance, Blackwood observed. Prepare for combat, gun crews at the ready, but hold fire until my command. Eleanor retreated to her cabin as ordered, but not before glimpsing the paper Harrison handed to Blackwood, a naval warrant. She realized official documentation of the price on his head. The gravity of their situation crystallized. If captured, Blackwood wouldn't face mere imprisonment. British Admiralty courts were notoriously unforgiving toward privateers who targeted their ships, especially those with personal vendettas against naval officers. For the next hour, she paced her small cabin, listening to the controlled chaos overhead, feet pounding across decks, orders shouted, cannon readied. Blackwood's logbook lay on her bunk, partially written. Its pages had revealed a man far different from the ruthless pirate of legend, the educated son of a shipping magnate, transformed by injustice into an agent of personal retribution. A sharp knock interrupted her thoughts. Miss Thorne. Pip's young face appeared at her door, eyes wide with excitement and fear. Captain needs you on the quarterdeck. Right away. She followed him through the labyrinth of the ship, emerging onto a deck bathed in moonlight. The British frigate loomed closer now, its gunports open, lanterns illuminating its aggressive approach. Blackwood stood with his officers around the ship's chart, face grim in the lamplight. He looked up as she approached. Miss Thorne, you studied the Spanish medical text thoroughly. Confused by the unexpected question, she nodded. Yes, Captain. And the accompanying charts of the Caribbean. Understanding dawned. The book had contained detailed maps of coastlines and currents, information she'd absorbed without considering its practical application. The reef passages, she said. East of Antigua. Precisely, he gestured to the chart. We're here. The frigate is gaining. We cannot outrun her in open water, and we're outgunned in direct confrontation. But the reef passages are too narrow for a vessel that size, Eleanor continued, seeing his strategy, while the Pearl could navigate them. If we had a skilled enough navigator, Harrison muttered. Our last one took a Spanish bullet at Cartagena. Blackwood's gaze remained on Eleanor. You have an exceptional memory for detail, Miss Thorne. I've observed it in your medical work. The Spanish text showed 7 navigable channels through the Eastern Reef System. Do you recall them? Eleanor closed her eyes, visualizing the pages she'd studied. The southernmost 3 were charted most completely. Marked safe for vessels drawing less than 18 feet, though the middle passage requires precise timing with the tide. Phillips scoffed. You'd trust our lives to a woman's memory of some Spanish drawings. I trust Miss Thorne's observations more than your complaints, Mr. Phillips, Blackwood replied coldly. The nearest channel, Miss Thorne. How would you approach it? Eleanor studied the chart, orientating herself to their current position. With a steady finger, she traced a route. Here, approach from the southwest to mask our intention. When the frigate commits to pursuit, change course sharply east. The channel mouth is hidden until you're nearly upon it, marked by a formation resembling a shark's fin. Blackwood and Harrison exchanged glances. It could work, the first mate admitted. If she's remembering correctly. I am, Eleanor stated with more confidence than she felt. Leaves depended on her recall of illustrations, studied for their botanical content, not their navigational significance. Then we have our course. Blackwood straightened. Mr. Harrison, bring us about, heading east-southeast. Mr. Phillips, have the gun crews stand ready, but preserve powder. We may need it for a more desperate moment. As the men dispersed to their duties, Blackwood turned to Eleanor. Remain on deck. I may need your memory again before this night is through. Captain, she began, voice low, if we're captured, we won't be. But if we are, she persisted, the warrant is for you, not your crew, not me. Perhaps terms could be negotiated. His laugh held no humor. Admiral Winthrop doesn't negotiate, Eleanor. If he takes the Pearl, he'll hang me from his yardarm, press the able-bodied men into naval service, and do God knows what with you. His eyes softened momentarily. But it won't come to that. Trust me, Teth. Another ranging shot from the frigate punctuated his words, this one splashing closer to their stern. They're finding our range, Harrison called. Blackwood gripped Eleanor's shoulder briefly, a gesture of reassurance that sent warmth through her despite their peril. To your station, Miss Thorne. Let's show the Royal Navy how the Black Pearl earned her reputation. As Eleanor moved to her position near the helmsman, the ship heeled sharply, turning toward the hidden reef passage and the slim chance of escape it offered. Behind them, The British frigate adjusted course in pursuit, its guns now clearly visible in the moonlight, the naval warrant for James Blackwood's capture clutched in the hand of a vengeful admiral who had hunted him across 2 oceans. The Black Pearl's escape through the reef passage had become legend among the crew, a tale already embellished with each retelling. How their captain had stood unflinching at the helm as coral scraped their hull. How the British frigate had fired futile broadsides before running aground on the hidden reef. How Eleanor Thorne, the scarred healer from Port Blackwell, had guided them through with nothing but her memory of a Spanish medical text. 3 days later, they anchored in a sheltered lagoon, embraced by an unnamed island, one of dozens scattered across this remote corner of the Caribbean. Unlike the bustling ports they typically frequented, this place remained untouched by European settlement, its white beaches empty of footprints, its lush interior a riot of tropical vegetation. Our sanctuary, Blackwood explained as a longboat carried them ashore. Known to few, marked on no official charts. Eleanor stepped onto the warm sand, wonder overtaking her usual reserve. It's beautiful. Indeed, the island presented a vision of paradise after their harrowing escape. Crystalline waters transitioning from turquoise in the shallows to deep sapphire beyond the reef. Palm trees swaying in the gentle breeze, colorful birds darting between flowering vines. We'll remain here until certain repairs are completed, Blackwood continued. The Pearl took some damage navigating the reef. The crew established a temporary camp at the edge of the beach, setting up cooking fires, erecting simple shelters from canvas and palm fronds, organizing work parties to gather fresh water and fruit. After weeks confined to the ship, the men's spirits lifted visibly, laughter and singing replacing the tense silence of their naval pursuit. Eleanor found herself with unexpected leisure. No injuries required her attention. No seasickness needed remedies. She wandered the shoreline, collecting shells and unusual plants, cataloging their properties in her mind for future reference. On the 3rd afternoon, she discovered a freshwater pool fed by a small waterfall tucked within a grove of flowering trees. The isolation tempted her. When had she last bathed properly, without the constraints of her tiny shipboard basin? After ensuring her solitude, she removed her salt-stiffened dress and slipped into the cool water. The sensation was heavenly. She floated on her back, watching sunlight filter through the canopy above, and allowed herself a rare moment of complete peace. "I see you've found my favorite spot," Eleanor gasped, sinking deeper into the pool as Blackwood emerged from the surrounding foliage. He halted immediately, turning his back when he realized her state of undress. "Forgive me," he said quickly. "I didn't realize." "No, I should apologize," she replied, mortified. "I shouldn't have presumed. This island belongs to no one," he interrupted. "Least of all me. Please, continue your bath. I'll return later." "Wait," she called, surprising herself. "Just turn around a moment longer." When he complied, she quickly donned her chemise, which preserved her modesty while still allowing her to remain in the water. "You can turn back now. I'm decent." Blackwood approached cautiously, remaining at the pool's edge. He'd discarded his captain's coat in the tropical heat, wearing only a loose white shirt and dark breeches. Without his formal attire, he appeared younger, less formidable. "This place has been my refuge for 7 years," he said, sitting on a flat stone beside the pool. "Whenever the hunt grows too intense or the men need respite, it feels untouched by the world's troubles," Eleanor observed. "That's its greatest value." He picked up a fallen hibiscus blossom, twirling it between his fingers. Few places remain where a person is judged solely by their present actions, not their past or appearance. The pointed reference to her scars might have offended her once. Now, from him, it felt like simple acknowledgement of a shared understanding. "The crew speaks of nothing but your navigational miracle," he continued. "You've earned their respect." "Even Phillips?" Blackwood's expression darkened. "Phillips respects only himself and whatever advantages he can secure. I keep him as quartermaster because his mathematical mind is unmatched. But I harbor no illusions about his character. Why tell me this? Because you should remain cautious around here. He hesitated, then reached into his pocket. I brought you something. From the ship. In his outstretched palm lay a delicate hairpin fashioned from mother of pearl, its shimmering surface catching rainbows in the dappled sunlight. It was my mother's, he explained. I thought your hair has grown longer since you joined us. Perhaps you might find it useful. Eleanor stared at the beautiful object, not a practical gift like the Spanish text or proper boots, but something purely ornamental, something a man might give a woman. She pushed the thought away, reaching carefully to accept the pin. It's exquisite. Are you certain you wish to part with it? I've carried it too long without purpose, he said simply. It deserves to be worn. Their fingers brushed during the exchange, sending an unexpected warmth through Eleanor that had nothing to do with the tropical air. For a breathless moment, something unspoken passed between them. Possibility, perhaps, or recognition. The moment broke when voices called through the trees, Harrison seeking the captain for some shipboard matter. Blackwood stood reluctantly. I should go. Enjoy your peace while it lasts, Eleanor. We sail with tomorrow's tide. As he disappeared into the foliage, Eleanor examined the pearl hairpin in her palm. A treasure far more precious than the silver coin from Port Royal. Not payment for services rendered, but a gift freely given, acknowledgement perhaps, that she had become something more than ship's surgeon in the eyes of the Devil's captain. That night, as firelight illuminated their beach encampment and sailors' songs drifted across the lagoon, Eleanor wore the hairpin. If Blackwood noticed from his place by the captain's fire, he gave no sign beyond a momentary softening around his eyes when their gazes met across the flame. 2 weeks after leaving their island sanctuary, the Black Pearl anchored in a secluded cove off Martinique to replenish water supplies. The French colony provided a temporary haven from British patrols, though Blackwood restricted shore parties to essential business only. Eleanor had settled into a comfortable rhythm aboard ship. The pearl hairpin, now a fixture in her growing hair, seemed to signify her transition from reluctant passenger to respected crew member. Even Phillips had tempered his open hostility, though his calculating gaze still followed her movements across the deck. When Blackwood invited her to dine in his cabin that evening, she accepted without hesitation. These private suppers had become increasingly frequent, opportunities to discuss books, share observations, and enjoy conversation beyond the practical matters of ship's business. To our successful navigation, Blackwood toasted, raising a glass of amber rum. Eleanor sipped her own more cautiously. I still don't understand why Admiral Winthrop pursues you so relentlessly. Your logbook mentioned the seizure of your family's ships, but surely there's more to create such obsession. Blackwood's expression darkened. Winthrop seized more than ships. He destroyed my family's reputation with false accusations. My father died in Newgate prison, awaiting trial for smuggling charges that were entirely fabricated. He took another sip. But you're right, there's more. Winthrop's son served as lieutenant on my first privateer vessel. During an engagement with a Spanish galleon, the young man revealed himself as his father's spy. He attempted to sabotage our powder magazine. What happened to him? My crew wanted him hanged on the spot. I chose mercy, marooned him on a trading route where he'd be found within days. Blackwood's smile held no warmth. Apparently Admiral Winthrop considered this insufficient gratitude for his son's attempted murder of my entire crew. Eleanor considered this revelation, so your reputation for ruthlessness is largely Winthrop's creation, he finished. Though I've admittedly done little to discourage it, fear keeps many potential enemies at bay. He reached for the rum bottle to refill their glasses. As he poured her portion, Eleanor noticed something unusual. An oily film floating atop the amber liquid. Wait, she said sharply. Don't drink. Blackwood froze. Glass halfway to his lips. What is it? Something's wrong with the rum. She lifted her glass, examining the contents more carefully. There's a separation that shouldn't be present in pure spirits. His eyes narrowed. You suspect tampering? I've seen similar characteristics in certain toxic tinctures. She sniffed cautiously. Bitter almonds. Captain, this contains extract of bitter almonds, poisonous in concentrated form. Blackwood set his glass down with deliberate care. Who had access to this bottle? It was delivered by Pip, but I didn't prepare it, Captain. The boy blurted from where he stood against the wall, face pale with fear. Mr. Phillips gave it to me special. Said it was premium stock from his personal supply, a gift for you and the lady. Eleanor's blood ran cold. Phillips, find him, Blackwood ordered, rising from his chair. Discreetly. But Phillips was nowhere to be found. A search of the ship revealed his bunk stripped, his few possessions gone. More disturbing was the discovery in his quarters, detailed maps of recent British patrol routes, correspondence with Admiral Winthrop, and a copy of Blackwood's bounty notice. He's been Winthrop's agent all along, Harrison growled when the evidence was presented. The lying bastard's probably halfway to the nearest British outpost by now. Blackwood's face remained impassive, but Eleanor saw the muscle twitching in his jaw, the only outward sign of his fury. Prepare to sail immediately, he ordered, and double the watch. If Phillips left accomplice assigned, I want them found. Later that night, as the Pearl slipped silently from the cove under cover of darkness, Eleanor found Blackwood alone on the quarterdeck, staring out at the black water. You should rest, she said softly. The poison might still have affected you from handling the bottle. I'm fine. His voice was tight with controlled anger. Thanks to your observant eyes. Phillips might have succeeded if he'd chosen a less distinctive poison, she observed. He underestimated my knowledge. He underestimated you entirely. Blackwood turned to face her, his expression softening in the moonlight. As many have done. Eleanor touched the pearl pin in her hair, self-consciously. Including you once. I recognized your value from the beginning, he countered, though perhaps not all of it. The admission hung between them, weighted with unspoken meaning. Eleanor found herself stepping closer, drawn by something beyond conscious thought. What happens now, she asked. We sail for open water, avoid British patrols, and prepare for Winthrop's inevitable assault. Phillips will have given him our last position, our heading, possibly even details of the Pearl's weaknesses. We've evaded him before, with the element of surprise. Blackwood's hand closed around the railing, knuckles white. That advantage is lost. Eleanor placed her hand beside his, not quite touching. Then we'll find another advantage. He looked down at their nearly touching hands, then back to her face. I'm part of this crew now, she said simply. Whatever comes, I'll face it with you. Something shifted in his expression, a yielding, a recognition. Slowly, deliberately, he covered her hand with his own. I've spent 7 years pursuing vengeance against Winthrop, he said quietly. It's become the purpose that drives me. But tonight, when I realized Phillips had nearly succeeded, he paused, struggling with words that clearly didn't come easily. I found myself fearing something worse than failure. The thought of leaving you unprotected in a world that has shown you little kindness. I don't need protection, Eleanor interrupted gently. I need purpose. You've given me that. You've given me something too, he admitted. Something I'd forgotten existed. The poisoned rum bottle lay safely contained in Eleanor's surgery. Evidence of betrayal transformed into an unexpected catalyst for truth. As the Black Pearl sailed into uncertain waters, its captain and surgeon stood watch together. Their shared vigilance, a silent declaration that something profound had changed between them. Something neither rum nor poison could dissolve. The decision to return to Port Blackwell had been strategic rather than sentimental. With Phillips' betrayal exposing their usual haunts to British patrols, Blackwood needed a harbour where Admiral Winthrop wouldn't think to search a forgotten backwater beneath naval notice. It's the last place they'd expect, he'd explained to his officers. And we need information about Winthrop's fleet movements before planning our next course. For Eleanor, the prospect of returning stirred conflicting emotions. She documented these feelings meticulously in the small leather-bound journal Blackwood had given her. her first possession aboard ship that wasn't strictly practical. In its pages she'd recorded not just medical observations, but personal reflections, transforming from the timid woman sold for rum into someone she barely recognized in the mirror. Harrison had mounted in her cabin. "Will you see your father?" Blackwood asked as they stood at the rail, Port Blackwell's familiar coastline materializing on the horizon. Eleanor touched the pearl hairpin that now rarely left her hair. "I haven't decided. He doesn't deserve your consideration. It's not for him," she replied softly. "It's for me, to close that chapter properly." Blackwood studied her face, the scars she no longer tried to hide, the confidence that had replaced shame in her bearing. "You've changed. The world looks different when viewed from the deck of the Black Pearl," she agreed. "Or perhaps I'm finally seeing clearly." They approached Port Blackwell, under a merchant flag, the Pearl's distinctive black sails temporarily replaced with inconspicuous canvas. The ship would appear as just another trading vessel to casual observers, including any of Phillips's potential informants. "Stay close to Harrison," Blackwood instructed as they prepared to disembark. "I'll handle our business with the harbor master and meet you at the Crossed Anchors Tavern by midday." Eleanor nodded, adjusting the blue silk scarf she draped over her hair, not to hide her scars, but to alter her appearance enough that she wouldn't be immediately recognized. The prospect of walking freely through the town that had scorned her sent a thrill of nervous anticipation through her veins. Port Blackwell appeared smaller than she remembered, its buildings shabbier, its streets narrower. She walked beside Harrison's imposing figure, observing the familiar landmarks with new eyes. The marketplace where Marianne Porter, the apothecary where the physician had warned her against women playing at medicine. The tavern where her father had lost fortunes in cards and dice. "That's him," she murmured, halting suddenly. Thomas Thorne staggered from the tavern door, more haggard than she remembered, his clothes hanging loose on his frame. He squinted in the bright sunlight, clearly nursing the effects of the previous night's excesses. "Want me to introduce his face to my fist?" Harrison offered, his protective instinct evident. "No," Eleanor replied, "but I do need a moment with him. Alone." "Captain won't like that." "The captain isn't here. Wait for me at the chandler's shop. I won't be long." Before Harrison could protest further, she crossed the street, intercepting her father's unsteady progress toward the docks. "Father," Thomas Thorne blinked blearily, confusion giving way to shock as recognition dawned. "Eleanor, is it really?" "It is." He gaped at her transformed appearance, the healthy glow of her skin bronzed by tropical sun, the fine blue dress that complemented her figure, the pearl hairpin catching the light. "They said you'd gone pirate," he blurted. "That Blackwood had made you his surgeon," she finished firmly. "I serve as the Black Pearl's surgeon." "Surgeon," he laughed incredulously. "With your little herbs and potions." "With my knowledge and skill," she corrected. "I've saved lives, father. I've earned respect." His bloodshot eyes narrowed. "You've come back to gloat then? Show off your fine clothes while I drown in debt?" "I came to close our chapter. And yes, perhaps to show you that the daughter you sold for rum has found her worth." She reached into her pocket and withdrew a small pouch. "This should cover what remains of your debt to Captain Blackwood. Consider our connection severed, along with any obligation between us." He stared at the pouch, then back at her face. For a moment, something like shame flickered in his expression. "Eleanor, I never meant." "It doesn't matter what you meant," she interrupted. "What matters is what you did, and what I've become, in spite of it." She turned to leave, then paused. "Mother would be disappointed in you, Thomas, but I think she would be proud of me." Eleanor walked away without looking back, her heart lighter than she'd anticipated. The journal tucked safely in her pocket contained the emotional preparation for this encounter. Pages where she'd rehearsed what to say, processed her anger, and ultimately found a path to liberation that required neither forgiveness nor revenge, just closure. She found Harrison waiting anxiously at the chandler's shop. "Everything all right?" he asked, studying her expression. "Better than all right," she assured him. "I've settled old debts." Their next stop was Widow Jenkins' small cottage on the edge of town, the only person in Port Blackwell who had consistently shown Eleanor kindness. The old woman's joy at seeing her was genuine, her embrace fierce despite her frail frame. "I knew that Captain would see your worth," she whispered. "I prayed for it." Before departing, Eleanor left the widow with a supply of her special remedies and instructions for their use. As they walked toward the crossed anchors to meet Blackwood, Eleanor realized she felt no attachment to this place that had once been her entire world. Her home now was a ship with black sails, her family a crew of men who judged her by her actions rather than her appearance, and her future bound to a captain with storm-grey eyes who saw in her what no one else had bothered to discover. The Crossed Anchors Tavern stood a notch above Port Blackwell's usual establishments, a favorite among ship captains and merchants rather than common sailors. Eleanor entered with Harrison, the confident swing of her skirts drawing glances that held surprise rather than the mockery she once expected. Blackwood waited at a corner table, his back to the wall, eyes constantly surveying the room. Before him lay several charts and a glass of untouched wine. He straightened as they approached, his gaze lingering on Eleanor. "How was your reunion with Port Blackwell?" he asked, as they joined him. "Illuminating," she replied. "I've settled matters with my father." Something in her tone must have conveyed the encounter's significance, for he simply nodded. "Good, we have information to discuss." Harrison signaled for additional drinks while Blackwood lowered his voice. "Admiral Winthrop has consolidated his fleet at Kingston, 3 ships of the line, plus the frigate that pursued us last month. He's preparing for a coordinated hunt," Eleanor concluded. "Precisely. With Phillips providing details of our usual routes and haunts, we need to disappear for a time." Blackwood traced a finger across one of the charts. "I'm considering the Northern Passage, cold and treacherous, but beyond Winthrop's usual hunting grounds. The men won't like it," Harrison warned. "They joined for Caribbean prizes, not North Atlantic gales. They joined to follow my orders," Blackwood corrected, though without heat. "But your concern is noted." Their conversation paused as a barmaid delivered their drinks. As she departed, Eleanor noticed a weathered man watching them from the bar, his gaze fixed, not on her, as she might have expected, but on Blackwood. "Captain," she murmured, "the man by the counter. He's been staring since we arrived." Blackwood glanced up, his expression betraying nothing. "An old acquaintance. Finish your drink, then return to the ship with Harrison. I'll join you shortly." "Is he dangerous?" "Not to us, but this conversation is best held privately." Eleanor recognized the tone that brooked no argument. She sipped her wine, using the moment to study the stranger more carefully. Something about his weathered face tickled her memory, a resemblance to someone she couldn't quite place. After draining their glasses, she and Harrison departed as instructed. Outside, Eleanor paused. "I've forgotten my shawl," she said. "Go ahead, I'll catch up." Harrison frowned. "Captain said, 'I'll be right behind you,'" she assured him. "It's broad daylight in a public tavern. What could possibly happen?" Reluctantly, Harrison continued toward the harbor while Eleanor slipped back inside. She kept to the shadows near the entrance, watching as the stranger approached Blackwood's table and sat uninvited. "James Blackwood," the man said, his voice carrying in the now quieter tavern. "Still sailing, I see. Still breathing, Mr. Hammond," Blackwood replied evenly. "Which is more than Winthrop would prefer." "Aye, the Admiral's quite determined these days, especially with Phillips feeding him information." Hammond leaned closer. "But I didn't seek you out to discuss Winthrop. Why did you seek me out?" "Because of her." Hammond nodded toward the door, and Eleanor shrank further into the shadows. "The Thorn girl, Eleanor." Blackwood's expression hardened. "What about her? You truly don't know, do you?" Hammond shook his head. "I wondered when Phillips told me you'd taken her aboard. Thought perhaps that was your reason for claiming her." "Explain yourself," Blackwood demanded, his voice dangerously soft. Hammond reached into his coat and withdrew a folded paper, yellowed with age, its edges worn from frequent handling. I was quartermaster on the Merry Widow when we rescued survivors from the Lady Elizabeth after the hurricane of... The Thorne family was aboard, Thomas, his wife Catherine, and their daughter. Catherine didn't survive the journey to port. Blackwood unfolded the paper. An old ship's manifest, Eleanor realized. His face remained impassive, but she saw his knuckles whiten as he gripped the document. Catherine Elizabeth Thorne, Hammond continued. Born Catherine Elizabeth Blackwood, your father's younger sister. The revelation struck Eleanor like a physical blow. She gripped the doorframe for support, her mind racing through implications. Blackwood's aunt, that would make him her cousin, Blackwood said flatly. Eleanor is my cousin, first cousin. I assumed you knew. When Phillips mentioned you'd specifically sought her out in Port Blackwell. I didn't seek her out, Blackwood interrupted. It was coincidence. Her father owed me money. Hammond looked skeptical. Mighty peculiar coincidence. Life is full of them. Blackwood carefully refolded the manifest. Does anyone else know this connection? Only those who served on the Merry Widow with me. Most are long dead or scattered. Hammond hesitated. There was something else among Catherine's possessions, a portrait miniature. The captain kept it with the logbook. From an inner pocket, Hammond produced a small oval frame. Inside was a delicate painting of a family, a bearded man in merchant's attire, a beautiful dark-haired woman, and between them a solemn-eyed girl of perhaps 5 years. The Thornes, Eleanor whispered, unable to stop herself, before the fever, before everything changed. Both men turned at her voice. Blackwood's expression flickered through surprise to resignation. You should have returned to the ship, he said quietly, and missed discovering I have family beyond a drunken father who sold me for rum. She approached the table, eyes fixed on the miniature portrait. My mother, I'd almost forgotten her face. Hammond looked between them, understanding dawning. You truly didn't know your connection. No, Blackwood confirmed, watching Eleanor carefully. Though perhaps it explains certain resonances I've felt since our first meeting. Eleanor touched the portrait's surface gently. My mother never spoke of her family. Father said they disowned her for marrying beneath her station. The Blackwoods were proud, Hammond agreed, but your mother's letters, recovered with her belongings, spoke of attempts at reconciliation. She was returning to England, hoping to reunite with her family when the hurricane struck. The tavern seemed to recede around them as Eleanor processed this revelation. The family portrait, her mother's serene face, her own unscared features, represented a path untaken, a life unravaged by fever and prejudice. I need air, she said abruptly, turning toward the door. Blackwood rose instantly. Eleanor, no, she cut him off. I need to think, alone. She hurried out into the bright sunlight of Port Blackwell, the town that had witnessed her humiliation, now witnessing her flight from a truth more complex than simple rejection. Behind her, carrying the portrait miniature that had survived shipwreck and separation, Captain James Blackwood, the Devil's captain, her cousin, her employer, her something more than friend, watched her go with an expression that held both understanding and something deeper he wasn't yet ready to name. Eleanor avoided Blackwood for 3 days after the revelation in Port Blackwell. The Black Pearl had set sail immediately, outrunning rumors of their presence before they could reach Admiral Winthrop's informants. Now they anchored off St. Lucia, preparing for what Harrison had described as the captain's most audacious scheme yet. She stood at her cabin mirror, barely recognizing the woman reflected there. The elegant gown Blackwood had commissioned from a discreet French modiste in Martinique transformed her from ship's surgeon to gentlewoman. Emerald silk complemented her sun-bronzed skin, while the modest neckline and long sleeves respected her preference to keep certain scars covered. The overall effect was striking rather than pretty, a distinction that suited her perfectly. A knock interrupted her contemplation. "Enter," she called, expecting Pip with another message she could politely deflect. Instead, Blackwood himself stood in the doorway, resplendent in formal evening attire. The black tailcoat and crisp white linen suited him far better than she wanted to admit. "You're avoiding me," he said without preamble. "I needed time to think. And have you finished thinking?" "No." She smoothed the silk over her hips. "But we have a governor's ball to attend, apparently." His lips quirked. "So Harrison informed you of our plan?" "He mentioned we're walking into the lion's den," she confirmed, though he neglected to explain why the captain of a hunted privateer vessel would willingly attend a ball hosted by the British governor of St. Lucia. "Because Admiral Winthrop will be there," Blackwood replied, "along with his most recent correspondence, which may contain details of Phillips's information and planned naval movements." Eleanor raised an eyebrow. "You intend to pick the Admiral's pocket at a formal ball?" "I intend for us to create a suitable distraction while Harrison accomplishes that particular task." He hesitated. "This plan requires your participation, but after recent revelations, I understand if you prefer to remain aboard." "You need me," she stated simply. "Yes." The single word hung between them, weighted with meanings beyond the immediate mission. Eleanor turned back to the mirror, adjusting the pearl hairpin, the one constant in her transformed appearance. "Then I'll accompany you, but we will discuss other matters later." "Agreed." Relief flickered across his features. "There's one more element to your ensemble." From his pocket, he produced a folded silk handkerchief. Opening it revealed a delicate gold necklace with a small emerald pendant that matched her gown precisely. "It's on loan," he explained as she stared at it, "from a French countess who found herself unexpectedly short of funds after a disappointing encounter at the gaming tables." "A euphemism for piracy?" she asked dryly. "For business," he corrected. "May I?" After a moment's hesitation, she nodded, turning to allow him to fasten the necklace. His fingers were surprisingly gentle against her nape, the brief contact sending an involuntary shiver down her spine. "Perfect," he murmured, stepping back to observe the effect. Eleanor touched the emerald pendant lightly. "Won't someone recognize you at this gathering? Your face must be familiar to British officers." "Admiral Winthrop has never seen me in person," he explained. "He hunts based on descriptions from others. As for the rest, people see what they expect to see. No one will look for Captain Blackwood among the governor's distinguished guests." 2 hours later, Eleanor found herself ascending the grand staircase of the governor's residence on Blackwood's arm. Around them swirled the colonial elite of St. Lucia, planters and merchants, naval officers and government officials, all dressed in their finest. Music from a small orchestra drifted through the open doors of the ballroom. Ahead, "Monsieur and Madame Beaumont," the majordomo announced as they presented their forged invitation. Eleanor kept her face carefully composed despite her racing heart. They were impostors in this glittering world, a scarred ship surgeon and a wanted privateer playing roles among people who would see them hanged if their true identities were discovered. "Remember," Blackwood murmured as they entered the ballroom, "confidence is our greatest disguise. You belong here as much as anyone." "Easy for you to say," she whispered back. "You were born to this world." "As were you," he reminded her. Catherine Blackwood's daughter would have moved in these circles had fate been kinder. The reminder of their connection sent a jolt through her. Before she could respond, a voice called out behind them, "Beaumont! James Beaumont, isn't it?" They turned to find a portly gentleman approaching, accompanied by a striking woman, whose calculating gaze assessed Eleanor's appearance with unconcealed interest. "Governor Harrington," Blackwood greeted smoothly, executing a perfect bow. "An honor to attend your magnificent gathering." "Delighted you could join us," the governor replied. "And this must be your lovely wife?" "Indeed." Blackwood placed his hand over Eleanor's on his arm. "May I present Madame Eleanor Beaumont?" Eleanor curtsied as she'd been hastily instructed, keeping her scarred side partially turned away from direct view. "Your home is magnificent, Governor." "Most kind," Harrington beamed. "I don't believe I've had the pleasure before. Recently arrived in the islands?" My wife has been indisposed, Blackwood interjected smoothly. A lengthy illness from which she has fortunately recovered. The governor's wife leaned forward, her curiosity evident. Those French physicians work wonders, though the marks of illness can linger so inconveniently. Have you tried essence of rosewater? I find it miraculous for improving one's complexion. Eleanor felt heat rising to her face, but Blackwood's steady presence beside her bolstered her courage. My husband finds my appearance entirely satisfactory, Madam Harrington, she replied, with practiced dignity. As do I. The governor chuckled appreciatively at her spirited response. Well said, Madame Beaumont. There's Admiral Winthrop just arriving. You must meet him, Beaumont, particularly given your merchant interests. As the governor guided them toward the entrance where a distinguished naval officer in full dress uniform was being announced, Eleanor squeezed Blackwood's arm in warning. The man who had hunted him across 2 oceans, who had destroyed his family and driven him to a life of privateering, now stood merely yards away. Their audacious masquerade had just become infinitely more dangerous. Admiral Winthrop proved both more and less than Eleanor had imagined. In his 60s, with silver hair and the weathered complexion of a man who had spent decades at sea, he carried himself with the absolute authority of someone accustomed to unquestioning obedience. His shrewd eyes assessed everything around him with military precision. When Governor Harrington introduced James and Eleanor Beaumont, Eleanor felt Blackwood's arm tense beneath her fingers, though his expression remained pleasantly neutral. French merchants, Admiral, the governor explained. Recently established in Martinique with interests throughout the islands. Martinique, Winthrop repeated, his gaze sharpening. Dangerous waters these days. Pirates and privateers growing increasingly bold. Indeed, Blackwood agreed smoothly. One hears terrible stories of this Blackwood character. A particular concern for legitimate traders such as myself. Eleanor marveled at his audacity, discussing his own notorious reputation with the very man who had created it. You needn't worry much longer, Winthrop assured them. We have solid intelligence on Blackwood's movements. The Black Pearl will soon decorate the bottom of the Caribbean. Splendid news, Blackwood replied, raising his glass in salute. To your success, Admiral. Their escape from the governor's ball had been narrow but complete. Harrison had successfully obtained Winthrop's correspondence, while Eleanor created a diversion by feigning lightheadedness, allowing Blackwood to guide her outside for fresh air from which they never returned. By midnight, the Black Pearl was underway, slipping past the harbor patrol, under cover of darkness. The stolen documents confirmed their worst fears. Phillips had provided Winthrop with detailed information about the Pearl's capabilities, regular routes, and even the location of their island sanctuary. More alarming, the Admiral had deployed a 3-ship squadron specifically to hunt them, with orders to sink the Pearl if capture proved impossible. We have perhaps a day before they realize their intelligence has been compromised, Blackwood informed his assembled officers in the pre-dawn darkness. We must use that advantage to escape the net Winthrop has cast. Now, 20 hours later, escape seemed increasingly unlikely. 2 British warships had appeared on the horizon shortly after noon, forcing the Pearl eastward toward the open Atlantic rather than their planned course to friendly Dutch waters. As dusk approached, a 3rd ship materialized to their northeast, completing the trap. They're coordinating their movements by signal flags, Harrison reported grimly, closing the distance systematically. On the quarterdeck, Blackwood studied the approaching vessels through his spyglass. His expression betraying nothing of the calculation Eleanor knew occupied his mind. She had insisted on remaining on deck despite the danger, knowing her medical skills would soon be needed. Your orders, Captain, Harrison prompted. Blackwood lowered the spyglass. We can't outrun all 3. Prepare the gun crews. We'll make our stand against the frigate to starboard. She's fastest but more lightly armed than the others. Aye, Captain. As Harrison bellowed orders, Blackwood turned to Eleanor. You should go below. We've had this discussion before, she reminded him. My place is where I'm needed. His expression softened momentarily. Always so stubborn. A family trait, perhaps. The reference to their shared blood drew a brief smile before his attention returned to the approaching threat. Stay clear of the main deck once the engagement begins. We'll take fire from multiple directions. The tension aboard ship built as the distance to the nearest British vessel, the frigate HMS Relentless, steadily decreased. Gun crews stood ready, Marines with muskets positioned in the rigging, every sailor armed with cutlass or pistol for the expected boarding attempt. When the first cannon shot came, it wasn't from their pursuers but from the Black Pearl herself. A precise strike that damaged the Relentless's foremast, disrupting her approach. Well placed, Harrison shouted as their gun crews reloaded. The British response was immediate and overwhelming. Cannon fire erupted from all three vessels, shells screaming overhead or smashing into the Pearl's hull. The air filled with splinters, smoke and the groans of wounded men. Eleanor worked frantically as casualties mounted. Her surgery quickly overflowed, forcing her to treat men where they fell. Blood slicked the deck beneath her knees as she extracted splinters, bound wounds and administered what painkillers her dwindling supplies allowed. Through the chaos, she glimpsed Blackwood moving among his men, shouting orders, encouraging gunners, personally taking the wheel when the helmsman fell. His coat was gone. His white shirt stained with powder burns and blood, his sword in constant motion against British Marines who had managed to grapple alongside and board. "Eleanor," his voice cut through the din, "behind you." She turned to find a British officer advancing, cutlass raised. Without thinking, she flung her medical kit at his face, the distraction giving her just enough time to scramble away. Before the man could pursue, Blackwood was there, his own sword meeting the officer's with a metallic clash. "Get to the stern," he ordered between parries. "Now." Eleanor retreated, as commanded, watching in horror as Blackwood engaged not just the officer, but two Marines who joined the attack. His swordsmanship was extraordinary, a lethal dance of precision and power that kept all three opponents at bay. But even his skill couldn't overcome the odds indefinitely. As he dispatched one Marine with a thrust through the chest, the officer's cutlass slipped past his guard, slicing deep across his right shoulder. Blackwood staggered, but didn't fall. With a growl of pain and determination, he redoubled his attack, driving the remaining British fighters back toward the rail. A final explosive thrust sent the officer overboard with a scream that was lost in the battle's roar. Eleanor rushed to Blackwood's side as he sagged against the mainmast, his sword still raised defiantly, though his face had paled from blood loss. "You're wounded," she said, examining the deep gash that had laid open his shoulder to the bone. "It's nothing," he insisted, eyes still tracking the battle raging around them. "It's not nothing," she contradicted, pressing a wadded cloth against the wound. "You need stitching immediately." "Later," he growled, pushing away from the mast. "The Relentless is closing again." Before Eleanor could argue further, an ominous splintering sound came from below decks. Harrison appeared from the hatchway, his face grim beneath the blood and soot covering it. "Hull breach, Captain," he reported. "Lower gun decks flooding. We've lost the powder magazine. Can't return fire much longer." Blackwood's eyes met Eleanor's, and in that moment she read what he would never say aloud. The Black Pearl was dying beneath them, and with it perhaps their last chance of survival against Admiral Winthrop's vengeance. The hidden cove on Dominica's rugged eastern coast had saved them barely. With the Black Pearl taking on water and half her crew wounded, Blackwood had made a desperate gamble, sailing directly into a narrow channel most captains would consider impassable. The British ships, unwilling to risk their larger vessels on the treacherous approach, had been forced to break off pursuit. Now, 5 days later, the damage assessment was grim. The once proud vessel lay listing in the shallow water, her hull patched, but fundamentally compromised. They had lost 17 men in the battle, with another 5 succumbing to wounds despite Eleanor's tireless efforts. "She'll never outrun a naval vessel again," Harrison reported, as they convened in Blackwood's cabin. "We've repaired what we can, but without a proper shipyard." Blackwood nodded, his face drawn with pain and exhaustion. The wound in his shoulder had become infected, despite Eleanor's treatment, leaving him fevered for 3 days before finally responding to her strongest poultices. He sat propped against pillows, studying the charts spread before him. "What are our options?" Eleanor asked, carefully changing the dressing on his shoulder. "Limited," Harrison admitted. "We could try limping to Tortuga, but we'd be vulnerable the entire journey. Or abandon ship here and attempt to secure passage on another vessel." "Abandon the Pearl." Blackwood's voice, though weakened, carried the edge of command that had kept his crew loyal through years of dangerous voyages. "Unacceptable. There's another possibility," Harrison said reluctantly, producing 2 folded papers from his coat. These were among Winthrop's correspondence. Passage tickets on a Dutch merchant vessel, departing St. Eustatius in 3 days. Bound for Amsterdam. Eleanor's hands stilled. Legitimate passage to Europe. How did Winthrop come by these? Seized from a Dutch diplomat, apparently. The Admiral's methods aren't always aligned with his government's policies. Harrison placed the tickets on the chart. A longboat could reach St. Eustatius in a day and a half with favorable winds. "You're suggesting we flee," Blackwood observed, his tone neutral. "I'm suggesting you and Miss Thorne take an opportunity for a new beginning." Harrison met his captain's gaze steadily. "The rest of us can make our way to Tortuga or Nassau. Most have contacts there, places to disappear until this blows over." "And what of Winthrop?" "Phillips, the vengeance I've pursued for 7 years." "With respect, Captain," Harrison said quietly, "vengeance has nearly cost you everything. Perhaps it's time to consider if the price is worth paying." The first mate withdrew, leaving them alone with the weight of decision hanging in the air. Eleanor finished bandaging Blackwood's shoulder in silence, her mind racing through implications. "What are you thinking?" he finally asked. "That Harrison's suggestion isn't entirely without merit." Blackwood's expression hardened. "You want to run." "I want you to live," she corrected sharply. "This obsession with Winthrop has brought you to the edge of destruction. Look around you, James. Your ship is crippled. Your crew decimated. You yourself nearly died." It was the first time she had used his given name. The intimacy of it seemed to catch him off guard. "Some causes are worth dying for," he said finally, "and some aren't worth sacrificing everything else for." Eleanor picked up the passage tickets, studying their official stamps and seals. "These represent a choice: continue a vendetta that may well destroy you, or begin anew." "Begin what, exactly?" "Become a respectable merchant in Amsterdam. Pretend the past 7 years never happened. Is that so unthinkable?" She placed the tickets beside him. "You were meant for more than this endless cycle of vengeance and flight." Blackwood stared at the tickets, his expression unreadable. "And what of you? What future do you envision in Amsterdam, or anywhere else?" The question hung between them, weighted with unspoken possibility. Eleanor sat on the edge of his bunk, close enough to feel the heat of his fever-ravaged body. "I envision a future where my skills are valued," she said carefully, "where I'm judged by my abilities rather than my appearance. Where I belong." She paused. "I found those things aboard the Black Pearl. Because of the ship, or because of its captain?" The directness of his question demanded equal honesty. "Both," she admitted. "But ships can be replaced. Some people cannot." His hand covered hers where it rested on the tickets. "There's something between us, Eleanor, something that has nothing to do with our shared blood." "Yes," she acknowledged simply. "It complicates matters." "Life is complicated," she countered, "especially for people like us." The ghost of a smile touched his lips. "Like us. The scarred healer and the privateer captain. What a pair we make." "A formidable one," she agreed, returning his smile. "But we must decide our path forward. These tickets would separate us from the crew that has become your family as much as mine," he finished. "I see the way they look to you now, not just for healing, but for guidance. The respect you've earned." Eleanor hadn't considered this aspect. The men of the Black Pearl had indeed become a surrogate family from young Pip, who followed her like an eager puppy to gruff veterans who now tipped their hats when she passed. Even Harrison, initially skeptical, now treated her as something approaching an equal. "What do you want, James?" she asked softly. "Beyond vengeance, beyond the past. What future would you choose if truly free to decide?" He was silent for a long moment, his thumb tracing absent patterns on her hand. "I want justice for my father," he said finally. "But perhaps I've confused justice with revenge." He looked up, meeting her gaze directly. "And I want you beside me, whatever path we take." The admission, so simply stated yet profound in its implications, left Eleanor momentarily speechless. Before she could respond, Harrison's voice called urgently from the deck, "Sail ho! British colours!" The moment of decision had arrived, but with options rapidly diminishing. As Blackwood struggled to rise, determination overcoming physical weakness, Eleanor realized their choices now might well determine not just their future, but whether they would have one at all. The British vessel approaching the hidden cove turned out not to be Admiral Winthrop's feared squadron, but a lone patrol sloop, dangerous still, but not the overwhelming force they had dreaded. With the Black Pearl unable to flee, Blackwood had made a bold decision: divide the remaining crew, with half departing immediately in longboats for nearby neutral ports, while he, Eleanor, Harrison and a skeleton crew remained to execute a daring deception. They had set fire to the Pearl's upper works while preserving her lower hull, creating the impression of complete destruction. When the British sloop cautiously investigated the burning vessel, they found convincing evidence, including Blackwood's blood-stained coat and logbook, suggesting the notorious captain had perished along with his ship. "They'll report back to Winthrop that his hunt is over," Harrison predicted as they watched from their hiding place in the dense coastal forest. "The Black Pearl destroyed, her captain dead. Let him believe it," Blackwood replied. For now, 3 months later, Eleanor stood on the deck of the Distant Star, a Dutch merchant vessel, making its final approach to Port Blackwell. The trading mission to St. Eustatius had been Harrison's idea, a means of acquiring funds while maintaining their new, deliberately low profile. Eleanor had volunteered to represent their interests in her former home, knowing the risk of recognition was minimal after her transformation. "You're certain about this?" Blackwood asked, joining her at the rail. The salt breeze ruffled his hair, grown longer since their narrow escape, and now tied back with the same leather cord he'd worn when she first met him. "Port Blackwell holds nothing for me now," she assured him, "just one piece of unfinished business." He nodded, his hand covering hers, where it rested on the railing. The matching gold bands on their fingers caught the morning sunlight, simple rings purchased in St. Eustatius after a quiet ceremony witnessed by Harrison and the Dutch merchant captain, who had offered them passage. Their marriage had surprised no one but themselves, the culmination of a bond forged through shared danger, mutual respect, and eventually a love that defied conventional boundaries. Their blood connection as distant cousins had proven no impediment, either legally or emotionally. "I'll accompany you," Blackwood, now using the name James Thorne in a deliberate adoption of her family name, insisted. "Not necessary," she replied. "Besides, your face might be remembered from our last visit," he conceded with a reluctant nod. 2 hours, then. If you're not back, I'll come looking." Eleanor's return to Port Blackwell revealed a town barely changed in the months of her absence. The same ships crowded the modest harbor. The same merchants hawked their wares in the square. The same gossips gathered at the well, only now she walked through it all with head high, her scarred face uncovered, her bearing that of a woman who knew her worth. She found Marianne Porter, once her chief tormentor, serving ale at her father's tavern. "Eleanor Thorne," Marianne gasped, nearly dropping her tray of drinks. "We thought you dead, or worse, considering who purchased you." "As you can see, I'm quite well," Eleanor replied calmly. "I've come about my father." Marianne's expression shifted to something resembling pity. "You haven't heard, then? Thomas passed 3 weeks ago. Drink finally took him." Eleanor absorbed this news with a complex mixture of emotions: regret, relief, a sense of chapters closing. Where is he buried? Pauper's Field. His debts exceeded anything of value he left behind. After visiting the unmarked grave where her father lay, Eleanor made one final stop, the cottage where she had grown up. New occupants had already taken residence, but they permitted her to retrieve the one item she sought, a small portrait of her mother that had hung in her father's bedroom, overlooked during his creditors' hasty inventory. As she stepped back onto the distant star, Eleanor felt the weight of her past finally lifting. Blackwood waited on deck, his tall figure unmistakable even at a distance. "Did you find what you needed?" he asked as she approached. In answer, she showed him the portrait, a companion to the miniature Hammond had given them, showing her mother in the full bloom of her beauty before illness and hardship had touched their family. "The last piece," she said softly. He nodded in understanding, his arm encircling her waist, as they turned to watch Port Blackwell receding behind them. Neither spoke for several minutes, content in shared silence. "Where to now, Captain Thorne?" she finally asked, a smile playing at her lips. "Wherever we choose," he replied. "The Caribbean grows too confining, I think. Perhaps the Pacific or the Mediterranean. I hear the waters around Greece are particularly beautiful. A long journey. We have time." His hand found hers, their rings touching. "And worthy companion." Eleanor followed his gaze to where Harrison supervised the crew, men carefully selected from their former ship, loyal to their captain and the woman who had earned their respect through skill and courage rather than birthright or beauty. "Do you ever regret it?" she asked. "Giving up your vendetta against Winthrop?" Blackwood considered the question seriously. "Some days, but then I remember what I gained in exchange." He touched her cheek gently, his fingers tracing the pattern of scars he had come to see as a map of her strength. "Some prices are too high, even for justice. And some rewards unexpected," she added softly. That evening, as the distant star sailed eastward toward open ocean and unknown horizons, Eleanor stood at the bow beside her husband, watching stars emerge in the darkening sky. The matching wedding bands on their hands represented not just their union, but a transformation neither could have imagined when he had purchased her for a barrel of rum in a forgotten port town. She had been called the ugliest bride in Port Blackwell, traded away like unwanted cargo, valued less than spirits in a barrel. Now she stood as ship's surgeon, respected healer, and equal partner to a man who had once been the most feared captain on the Spanish Main. "Look there," Blackwood pointed to a particularly bright star emerging on the horizon. "That's our course following the evening star eastward. To new beginnings," Eleanor said, leaning into his embrace. "And worthy endeavors," he agreed. "I find I prefer building a future to avenging the past." As darkness settled fully around them, the legends of the Devil's Captain and the scarred healer faded into memory, while James and Eleanor Thorne sailed onward toward whatever adventures awaited together, as equal, bound by choice rather than circumstance, their scars visible but no longer defining who they were or who they might yet become.